Welcome to Explore Classroom. My name is Andrea Villarreal Rodriguez, but you can call me Andy. I am a National Geographic Young Explorer, a storyteller, and your host for today. I am talking to you live from Monterrey, a city in northern Mexico. We are so excited to have you joining us for another event in the Explore Classroom storytelling series. And if you tuned in into our last show, welcome back. And if this is your first time joining us, we are so happy that you are here. Today, we will continue on our journey to learn about the power of storytelling directly from National Geographic explorers and to inspire you to connect to the stories in your own communities. National Geographic's approach to storytelling is all about making an impact by telling the true stories around us in order to open hearts, change minds, and inspire action. Throughout the storytelling series, we'll discover how our explorers do just that. Before we get into today's lesson, I'd like to give a shout out to all of the classes that have completed one or more missions in the storytelling series thus far. Let's roll the video. Go ahead and cheer if you see your school name. Well done, classes. We absolutely love seeing examples of your work and learning about your progress from your teachers. If you do not see your school name, teachers, there is still time to submit the mission completion form for the previous missions. And after today's event, complete mission 3 with your students and submit the form before our next event to have your school name added to the shout-out list. Now let's get into today's show. Today, our explorer is Paul Salopek. Paul is a writer and Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who has spent the last 12 years retracing our ancestors' global migration out of Africa on foot for a storytelling project called the Out of Eden Walk. He started his journey in Ethiopia in 2012, the black circle all the way on the left side of your screen, in Africa, and has since then walked thousands of miles through the Middle East, Asia Minor, Central Asia, the Himalayan mountains, India, and spent the last 2.5 years crossing mainland China. Paul is now making his way through Japan, the black circle in the middle of the screen, which will take him about 2 months before he takes a big leap across the ocean and walks down the American continent, starting in North America and ending at the tip of South America to complete his journey right on the bottom right side of your screen. Today, Paul will be joining us live to tell us all about the art of connecting with people, to share his interview tips, and of course, answer your questions. But first, let's learn a bit more about the Out of Eden Walk and what Paul calls slow journalism, a reporting style that involves immersing yourself in a story and taking the time to understand the people and communities involved.
I'm a reporter. I'm just kind of an ordinary reporter. I've worked for American newspapers for years.
I would fly into stories. I would spend days, weeks, sometimes months. I would write the story. I would go home. On to story B, do the same. Story C, do the same.
I decided to get off that merry-go-round and just say, stop. Why am I doing this? Why am I taking this path? It's basically an effort to try to slow myself down as a storyteller enough to immerse myself into the stories of everyday people, but we rarely get to hear their voices.
Where I can go to truly understand the stories. Where I can go to get not just information, but meaning. And that's what slow journalism is about.
And so the way to do that is to just walk through these stories.
The distance that I walk each day varies. It depends on whether there are enough stories, and if there are, then I stop. And so stories slow me down. because it takes time to talk to people. I record videos, I take sound, I shoot still photographs, pass the camera and microphone to the people, and to stop talking for them and let them speak for themselves.
How long have they been traveling? Where are they going?
My process is I write down basically in real time. It all starts with the foundation of a pen and a notepad and taking down notes the old-fashioned way.
Wow, I wonder how many notebooks Paul has gone through since he started his journey. Maybe one of you can ask Paul later. But for now, students, I have a question for you. Teachers, get close to your keyboard so you can answer for your class. In a moment, you'll see a poll on your screen. Select the answer that gets the most votes from your class. Paul has been traveling on foot for the last 12 years and has met and interviewed countless people along the way. Imagine you are traveling like Paul. Who would you most want to interview on your journey? Answer A, the oldest person in town. Answer B, a shop owner. Answer C, someone famous. Answer D, a town leader. Or E, a local student. Again, the question is, if you were traveling like Paul and you were in a place for the first time, who would you most want to interview? If you have a response that is not one of these choices, we'd love to hear that too. Feel free to type yours in the chat. And I'm going to pause and be quiet to give your students time to think and answer. So let's start the countdown. We have some folks in the chat that are saying all of the above, and that's a totally valid answer. Over here on Zoom, we have 43% of the vote for the oldest person in town, and that's our most popular answer. I love that. We also have some votes for a local student. I like that. Interviews between peers. We also have town leader, someone famous, and shop owner. So basically, all of the answers got some votes. And on YouTube, the answer is also mostly A. And so I'm very interested in your students' interests in older people because they have so many stories to tell. So thank you so much for sharing your answers. And these are all great choices. As you will see today, there are so many unique individuals in the world's communities. And students, you've just done exactly what Paul does. When he gets to a new place, he also thinks about who he would most like to talk to learn about their lives and their community. I'm so excited to learn more about his process. Let's welcome Paul to Explore Classroom. Hi, Paul. Great to see you again.
And it's great to be back with you.
I love that. Paul, I understand you were recently in Inuyama, Japan, where you were able to interview a woman who owns a 115-year-old family business. We're going to show some clips from this interview in a moment, but first, could you tell us why you picked this person in particular and how you approached them?
Yeah, Ms. Hirano is the owner of a 115-year-old family business selling ceramics. So we're talking 3 or 4 generations of people selling pottery. And it's a special kind of pottery that itself is more than 3 centuries old. And the reason I gravitated towards Ms. Hirano and her shop, she had a little shop on a small alleyway, was that this town in central Japan is famous for history and culture. There's a 16th century beautiful castle that overlooks it. So I knew I needed something about culture here. So I gravitated to her. And one thing that's important to keep in mind as all of you set out to find your interview subjects is sometimes you choose the interview subject, and on a few occasions they choose you, right? In the sense that they're very open and friendly. And Ms. Harano was very open and friendly. So what we're going to share right now is a quick clip of my much longer interview with her. And I'd like you to kind of take a look at it, watch carefully, get a sense of what a real interview looks like and how it proceeds. Notice that I'm talking through a translator because I do not speak Japanese. That's something a little different probably than some of you. Notice that I'm taking notes in a notebook. right? This is what I use, kind of very simple technology. It works when it gets wet, doesn't need batteries. Um, and also, I do record with the phone in this case, what was happening, but through video. So take a look and take a look and see what you think about this approach.
This building is 115 years old. どこで? So they had this building in another place, then they just relocated to here. So this whole structure is moved to here.
どうやって移築したのかしら。明治ですから、明治40
So 115 years ago, they figured out how to transport this whole thing from どこって言いました？どこにあったの？
名古屋の鶴舞港です。
名古屋。
What is special about this pottery?
この手法というか、この
犬山焼きと言います。
犬山焼き。This is 犬山castle.
Is there something special about the colors or
なん
the
かこの
design
カラーとか
that-
手法とかで、
この窯元さんだけのものはあります。この茶色いの。これ松皮焼きって言いまして、松の皮をイメージして焼いてるんですけど。
松皮焼き。松ってなんだ？
植物の。
So like pine color.
Pine.
Okay.
Kind of imitating
That
pine.
brownish.
よかったらぜひ出しますよ。
お願いします。
Wow. So it's inspired by the pine tree.
Yeah. So that's the only technique. This only the family.
This one. It's very beautiful. Wow.
Nowadays.
How does it make you feel to know that this work is all over the world in
なんか
cabinets?
今こう日本ここから今となっては世界中に家庭に持ってかれるわけじゃないですか。どういう気持ちですかね。
どういう気持ち？そうです。
世界に向かって。
ありがたいと思ってます。
I want to thank you so much for sharing
どう
this
もあり
with
が
us.
とうございます。
It's fantastic.
あ
Very
りがとうご
beautiful.
ざいます。
Thank you, Paul, for sharing this wonderful example of an interview with us. Could you please describe the different techniques that you demonstrated in the clip?
Sure, Andy. Let's run through a few things, 4 or 5 things that you might notice, and I'll try to explain that might be useful for all of you as you go out and interview your interview subjects. Notice how at the very beginning, I'm looking at Ms. Harano. I'm looking at her face. I'm smiling. I'm nodding. What I'm trying to do is create an emotional connection. Some of the best stories, no matter what you're writing about, no matter what your story will be, is it taps into human emotion. That's what gets people interested. So the sooner you can make an emotional connection with your interview subject by being empathetic, by showing that you're willing to listen, it allows people to open up. People kind of relax a bit. They go, okay, Paul is interested in my story in my family shop, and it gets people excited. Once people know you're listening, they want to talk to you. So that's one good tip. Another is ask what I call open-ended questions. And open-ended questions are basically any question that cannot be answered by a simple yes or no. So, I had to ask Ms. Hirano, how old is your shop? And the answer is simple. It's 115 years. Or do you like doing this business? The answer is simple. Yes. Those, of course, you can ask those, but the better questions are give answers that require her to tell a story, because that's when emotion comes in. How did your family, get into the business? Why are you still doing it after a century? Why questions are very good. It forces people to tell a little story. So open-ended questions, a good tip. You notice I started with big history of her shop. What is the shop? Why is it here? How old is it? But then we started digging down into what does a single cup look like, right? So start with big context questions, and slowly your curiosity will drive you to where there are details that are important. If I write a story about my interview with Ms. Hirano and I can't describe what the pottery looks like, readers will be scratching their heads saying, why is this even important pottery? What's the big deal? So I asked her to take the cups out, show them to me, and talk about them. Look at these leaves. Look at this color tone. It's based on a pine tree. And I can put these colorful details in the story. That's another tip. Ask questions along that line that require people to describe their senses, like what color was it? What did it feel like? How heavy is it? Right? This is called visual writing, where you kind of writing like a camera. You might be filming with your phone, but you also need words because she's an expert in this. You're not, and use her words to describe the beautiful details, the senses that go around the pottery. You noticed in this little clip, I asked a very important question. It's one that I almost ask in any interview. It doesn't matter whether it's a ceramicist, a shop owner, a teacher, a refugee. And this question is, how did it make you feel? Remember this question. How did it make you feel? You can't really start an interview with how do you make you feel because it's kind of personal, right? And people might kind of draw back a little bit. Once you have an interview going for a while and you're comfortable with your interviewee, that's when you ask it. How did it make you feel that your pottery is all over the world because she ships it to countries all? Is she proud? And she said in Japanese, "Arigato gozaimasu," thank you very much. Yes, I'm very proud to have my family's art everywhere in the world, right? If you're talking to a refugee and they had to leave their home, you have to ask them, how did that make you feel? You can't just ask kind of hard numbers about when it happened, who did it. How do you make you feel is the glue that kind of holds all this information together, right? It makes your story pop. It makes it human. The other thing, give your interviewee the last word. What I always end every interview with, and Andy, you probably do this too, is, did I leave anything out? Is there any other question that you think is important to add? Because of course, we as interviewers can never know all the great questions. And the person you're talking to might have a great story, but you don't know it because you simply didn't ask her. So wrap up your interview with a final question. Is there anything we missed that we've talked about? Anything you want to add? That's important. And then the final thing is notice that I ended on kind of a polite note. Very thankful. You give the person, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story. It's precious to me. I will do my best to honor it. Why do you do this? Because you may need to come back if you forgot a question and you want to leave them with a nice feeling when they see you again, or if you call them, that they will say, oh yeah, you. And I liked what you talked to me about, so I will go ahead and answer another question. Those are some tips.
Arigato gozaimasu. Thank you, Paul, for sharing those recommendations in detail. Now we want to hear from our students again. So teachers, please get close to your keyboard so you can answer for your class and select the answer that gets the most votes on your class. So the question is, Paul just shared these key techniques that he uses when interviewing people he meets on his journey. They are A, make an emotional connection. B, ask open-ended questions, questions that can be answered without a yes or a no. Answer C, work from big to small. Answer D, ask questions with your senses. Answer E, give the interviewee the last word. And answer F, end on a polite note. Our question for you is, which of these interview techniques would you think would be the most challenging for you? For example, I had never thought about asking people questions with all my senses. I usually just talk about, feelings or visual elements, but I really want to start asking people about scent and sound. I may forget this the first few times I try it, but I do want to try it. And so our question for you is, which of these interview techniques that Paul shared do you think would be the most challenging for you? I'm going to pause and be quiet so we can start the countdown. Okay, so over here on Zoom, we have make an emotional connection being the answer that students find the most challenging, but we also have some votes for asking open-ended questions. And maybe, oh, another set of votes for asking questions with senses. So, Paul, do you have any words of encouragement or advice for what students think is the most challenging?
I think these are good answers. My last point is probably, Andy, as you know, probably one of the most challenging parts of any interview is just getting walking up to somebody and asking them a question, right? Not being shy. So that's my last tip. I saved the best for last. It's not in your poll. You have to kind of overcome a natural shyness to go talk with a stranger. That can be difficult at first, but with a bit of practice, you can handle it.
I think that once you get past that, like, hi, how are you? Everyone just lets it
That's
flow.
right.
And it's
That's right.
awesome to see them how they open up to you. And so
That's
once you
right.
get past that, it gets easier, students.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, for those of you joining us for the storytelling series, this week your mission is to connect with a community member. So much like Paul, you will identify a member of your community, perhaps one of your community stars from the previous mission, and you will interview them. Paul, what other interview advice can you give to our students to set them up for success?
Yeah, let's go through a final little tip sheet that will just help make this kind of a strange process of going up to a stranger and having conversation, hopefully a little bit easier. And also, why is it important? Why do we even do interviews as journalists, right? You can write a story without an interview. You won't have any quotes. But the problem is that interviews crucially, vitally humanize stories. They make a story about anything. It could be about astronomy, it could be about archaeology, it could be about a war, it could be about your neighbor, it could be about the baker who makes the bread down the street. If you don't have interviews, you're missing the human voice of that story. And I can tell you from years of writing as a reporter that people love to read about other people. They love to hear the voices of other people because kind of that allows them to kind of step into your shoes and be there. You are kind of channeling this person's voice, their personality, what they look like, what they think, and people are fascinated by this. So keep in mind that interviews are really crucial. If you don't include them in your story risks being a bit dry and a bit uninteresting, just full of facts, right? So go interview somebody, no matter what the topic is, and have them kind of personify your story for you. That's number one. Number two, every interview I like to think of is like a river. It has a channel on each, it has a bank on each side. It's flowing in a direction, but it's also got back eddies. It goes off to the side. It might have feeders, little creeks. So you are kind of think of your interview as a guided conversation, like a river. You have to kind of lead it in a direction, but let it flow, let it slow down, let it speed up. It's a guided conversation. Don't be too over controlling because then it'll be too wooden and people will kind of be too stiff and talk to you kind of very formally. But don't be without control because then you're gonna wander all over the place and get lost within your own interview, right? So it's a balance. The other thing is choose whatever method of recording is you're most comfortable with. As you know, I'm a writer, so I use a pen and paper, but you can use your phone, audio, video, whatever's easiest for you, right? Here's another tip that's really important. I do it if I can, is that if I know who I'm going to interview, if I know kind of the person that's my target of an interview, I try to do a little research about that person and her or his job before I talk to them. That's important because people feel flattered. They feel honored that you might have tried to learn a little bit about what they do, and they're more apt to open up to you. They will return that respect, right? So do a little homework. If you're going to interview the baker down the street, go on Google, try to figure out a little bit when do bakers work? They work early in the morning, right? And what kind of different breads they use, et cetera, et cetera. And as a result of your homework, your research on your interview topic, write questions down. So like what I do if you use a notebook, I might write some questions right inside the back page that I can flip to kind of help guide my interview. Be careful though, because I think beginners often do these, Andy. They do these lists. I did when I started out, and we get too focused on the list and we kind of check them off. I answered question A, question B, and that also can get kind of mechanical, a bit wooden. This is mainly to remind you not to leave out any important questions, but you can deviate. In fact, you have to kind of go away from these questions. An answer to question A might lead to another question that's not on your list that is even more important than the questions you've written down. So again, think of a river. You're channeling in a direction, but it has to have some flow. You have to let it go. Um, the other thing is, during the interview, um, let the person speaking finish talking. Try not to interrupt them. You notice when I was speaking to Miss Hirano, I didn't interrupt her. And I couldn't because I didn't know what she was saying. I would, the translator would do it. So translators, they have great advantages. They allow me to understand people, but they also give me a little bit of time to kind of think of the next question. There's a little advantage in that. If your interviewee is talking slowly and you're getting impatient, don't cut them off. Don't push them. Let them finish their thought before asking the next question. Um, Another great question that I ask again and again is the why question. Why? You may say, if you interview the baker down the street and she or he is saying, I add the yeast right now. And a good question is why? Don't just write down she added the yeast right now. Say why, and that forces her to think about why am I adding it now, and then she can explain it in a story. Why questions are good. And finally, use silence to your advantage. Now, we're talking remotely here, and I'm filling up a lot of air with a lot of words. But if I were talking to you one to one doing an interview, I would be silent. I would be quiet. I'd ask you a question, Andy, and I would let you answer. And then I would wait maybe 2 or 3 seconds. And you would be kind of there waiting, saying, is he finished asking the question? Um, did I say something interesting or something wrong? But often a few seconds of silence prompts your interviewee to actually go further and to go deeper emotions, right? Go deeper into a more meaningful answer. So use silence in your interviews. Um, okay, I think that Andy, that pretty much wraps up all the tips. There are a lot. Yeah, go out and have fun.
That's the most important tip of all.
Yes.
I really love that river analogy. So thank you, Paul, for sharing these fantastic tips with our students today. And for all of you watching, we have one final question before we head into Q&A. So teachers, again, please get close to your keyboard so you can answer for your class. We're going to get some interview question ideas flowing. So if you had the opportunity to interview Miss Hirano, the ceramic shop owner that Paul interviewed in Japan, what would you ask her? I'm going to pause and be quiet to give your students time to think and answer. Again, the question is, if you had the opportunity to interview Ms. Hirano, the ceramic shop owner that Paul interviewed in Japan, what would you ask her? Let's start the countdown. Wow, we're getting some fantastic questions here in the chat. Some folks would love to see her workstation. Others would like her to describe what makes their pottery beautiful. How did the business start? What's her life story in Japan? What kind of clay or materials they use? Do they have any goals for the shop? What age did she start working at the shop? Wow, so many, so many incredible questions, and I'm sure you all are going to do a fabulous job with your interviews. On YouTube, we have questions about the type of paint, about what inspires her to make these designs. Wow. Paul, do you have anything to add?
I'm just impressed, Andy. The students are asking the exact kind of questions I would ask, and they're almost all open-ended, right? They're not a yes or no answer. You're forcing her to tell a small story. Good work.
Yay, our students are very quick learners.
Yes.
Awesome. So students, thank you so much for your questions. They are incredible. And now it's time to ask Paul your questions. If you're watching on YouTube, send us your questions using the chat bar. We record all of them as they're sent in. So please only send each question once. And teachers, please let us know who's asking the question so we can give your class or your student a shout out. If you're watching here on Zoom, use the hand raise function at the bottom of your screen to let me know that your class has a question. And we'll call on as many classes as time allows. And if we call on you, remember to use a nice, loud voice to ask your question. From Chapman Academy on YouTube, we have what has been your most personally impactful story as a slow journalist?
Oh my gosh. Wow. I would have to say that no matter what I tell you, yeah, I'm going to give you an example right now. But there have been so many life enriching interactions with people that it's transformed me as a person. It's hard to pick one, but I'll just think of one that's one of my favorites on this walk. And my walk is again 12 years old. It's older than some of you folks, maybe. But there's one that goes way back in the country of Georgia where some women came to my house. They needed a place to stay because they were taking a child to the hospital. The child had very serious problems. And they ended up spending weeks at my flat, basically because it was close to the hospital. And I got to know them as people. I got to know their struggle to save their boy. And I wrote a story about the boy. So I think that was probably one of the stories that I'm proud of, yeah, on this journey.
Wow,
And he
that's
survived, by the way. The boy survived. Yeah.
Wow, that's a beautiful story, Paul. And I'm sure that spending all this time with your new friends gave your story a whole bunch of layers. And so
Yeah, they became like family. Yeah.
beautiful. Along those same lines, Cesar on YouTube is wondering, on the road, how did you choose to interview certain people?
Yeah. That's a good one too. Oh, it's a mysterious process, so use the example of Miss Hirano. I was walking into this town I'd never been to before. This is completely new to me, but I had done my research, my homework, that I knew that it was a cultural center with a historic castle and that they had this ceramic tradition. So I sort of knew that I might want to talk to a ceramic seller or a ceramic maker, a potter, ceramicist, because that would be a likely story about somebody doing creative work today that has very deep roots. So that is kind of a targeted interview. What if I didn't do my homework? What if I hadn't kind of read about this stuff right online about this town in Japan? What if I bumped into Miss Hirano anyway? Let's just say her pottery caught my eye through the window. Would the interview be any different? I would say yes. I think it would have some strengths because my questioning might be more all over the place and it actually might turn up some more interesting information that's unrelated to history. That's possible. The other possibility is that maybe not. Maybe my research allowed me to kind of target what I wanted and go deep. So the mystery of these conversations, these guided conversations, is you sort of don't know how they're going to turn out, whether you do your homework or not. And that's part of the fun. That's part of what makes them so exciting is because you're always learning something new anyway, right? And the last point I'll add to your question is sometimes the unguided interviews, the accidental interviews can lead to the best stories.
Totally a win. And unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our show. So, Paul, do you have time for one more question?
Sure, happy to.
The question is, what final message do you have for the student explorers tuning in today?
I would say in the topic of being young reporters, in the topic of being beginning interviewers, welcome to the club. The beauty of doing this is it allows you to be curious, to indulge your curiosity. And you might, if you're not thinking this way, you might walk past a person who's doing something kind of interesting, but you might not feel like you could talk to them. This gives you the permission to tell yourself, I could go interview that person and ask them. So welcome to the Curiosity Club.
I love that, the Curiosity Club. Thank you, Paul, for joining us today and for inspiring us with your work, those wonderful tips, and that final message.
Thank
Bye.
you all. It's great to see you.
Adios. And thank you to all the students for engaging with us and for your thoughtful questions. Thank you, teachers, for bringing your classes to our show. For those of you joining us as part of the storytelling series, we have a mission for you. This week, your mission is to connect with a community member. You will choose an important community member to interview, like one of your community stars from the previous mission, or someone else you want to discover more about. This is an opportunity for you to step into Paul's shoes and apply the techniques that you've learned today. Teachers, please use the educator guide to learn more about this mission and submit the mission completion form to keep us updated on your students' progress. And next week, we will welcome the wonderful Tara Roberts to the show. Tara is a storyteller on a mission to find, document, and share the stories of the wrecked ships that transported enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean during the transatlantic slave trade. She'll tell us of how she dives into history to bring important stories back to the surface and why it's important to share those stories with the world. Lastly, we would love to hear from you, so teachers, please take a moment to fill out this quick survey that we're popping into the chat and let us know how you enjoyed today's show. You can also share about your experience on social media using the hashtag ExploreClassroom. From all of us at National Geographic, have a wonderful day, stay curious, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time. Bye!